All right. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. We have participants coming in, so welcome, welcome. We'll give it a few more minutes. Howard, how are you? Alex, how are you today?
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you.
Guys, good afternoon.
Fantastic. So we'll give it a minute or so. I still have more participants coming in. This is great.
Yeah.
All right, let's kick it off. I would love to introduce, thank you very much for taking the time to meet Howard and Alex for today's webinar. We're doing record keeping best practices for associations, such a hot topic now, more than ever. So I have here with me Howard Perl.
Hello.
Yes, shareholder for Becker and Punkoff, board certified, as you can see, best attorneys, lawyers in America, community association law from 2022 to present. And obviously we join forces a lot with Howard in associations that we manage. And it's always great to partner with you, Howard, and it's a privilege to have you here with us. So thank you very much. We
Thank you.
appreciate
The
it.
feeling is mutual.
Thank you. And then I have my colleague, Alex Argento. He's our VP of operations here in Florida, 25 years of experience in the field. And Alex.
Good afternoon, everybody. Howard, excited for today's webinar. I think there's a lot to unpack, so we're excited to get to it. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Correct. And I've been on the field for 15 plus years. Again, done several collaborations, being on site and now at a VP level for business and development for the team here. So in charge of the growth and obviously partnering and providing this wonderful education to our team members, board members, and everyone who can participate. So thank you, everyone. I will pass it down to Howard now. So let's get going. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you. And again, I'm glad to be here. We like working with AKAM. I'm actually dealing with a number of your other managers on a lot of projects right now. And it's always a pleasure. So I'm glad to be here with Maureen and Alex to go over this very important information, and especially in the way it's changed in the laws over the last couple of years. So for those who are watching on the webinar, the first 10 or 15 minutes might be a little boring. Because we're going to go over some of the normal stuff that's probably been in place for a while. Then we'll get into the real exciting stuff, the meat and potatoes, the new laws, and talk about some of that. So I'm just going to get right into it. So we got to start with the basics. You know, the basics are what records are required to be maintained by the association. And generally, we're talking about condos, co-ops, and homeowner associations. And we'll try to differentiate between the different changes in the laws as we talk about different aspects of that. So they're all pretty much the same for what records are to be maintained by the association. But let's talk condos first, Chapter 718, Florida statutes, which deals with condos. And the bottom line is anything that has to do with the operation of the association, you have to maintain as an official record. If you go to the statutes, the list is probably about this long as to what the statutes are, what you have to maintain. But then at the bottom, it has the catch-all phrase. And it says all other written records of the association not specifically included, which are related to the operation of the association. So to me, that means everything. Alex, Maureen, do you ever get any questions or pushback onto exactly what has to be maintained?
I think we get pushback, not so much. It's really, does this comply? Do I have to give this document? Do I need to give an invoice? Do I need to give contact information? So I think we'll get to that. But I think that, we talked about this briefly, Howard. I looked at, wanted to make sure we said it. If you live in a condominium, you're automatically a member of a nonprofit corporation, which administers the affairs of your condo. So to your point, for every corporation in America, we think every piece of paper is important. That's what we tend to tell our customers.
All right. So that was in condos. Chapter 719, which covers co-ops, says basically the same thing. And chapter 720, that covers homeowner associations, also basically says the same thing. Where you get into some of the idiosyncrasies is how long you have to maintain certain records, and we'll get to that in a minute. All right. But in general, what has to be maintained? If it has to do with the operation of the association, now I want you to listen carefully though, and it's a written record. It has to be maintained. Just keep that in the back of your mind for later. Where are they required to be maintained? Do you have to maintain them at the association? Can you maintain them if you're in Florida? Can you maintain them in New York? And the statutes are clear. They generally have to be maintained within the county the association is located, or within 45 miles of the association. So I have seen, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm not saying there's anything right with it, but I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, where some associations want to make their owners travel that have to review the records. So they have the records available at the management office, which is 20 miles away. There's not technically anything wrong with that. And that's something for you and your association attorney to discuss if and when you get to that point. But Maureen, do you folks ever have clients that want the inspection to take place at your offices?
It happens from time to time, but normally we have the facilitation of having everything online. And at the same time, we have offices in our condominium. So if there's an opportunity that they want to come here to our corporate, yes, absolutely, we'll facilitate. But normally it's done at an on-site. And obviously we partner with our attorneys if there's a lot of records or whatnot. So, but you do have it.
Yep, that's a fair answer and a good answer. So let's get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. How long are the records required to be maintained? And this has changed a little bit over the last few years. And we're going to talk about condos first. All right, so let's talk about Chapter 718, condominiums. There are certain things that an association is required to maintain forever. All right, meaning from the inception of the association. I'm sure we all have associations that were the condominium was established in the late 60s or the early 70s. And I get questions, all the time from my clients. Well, does that mean we're supposed to have the plans and the permits from the original building and we're supposed to have minutes from 27 years ago? And the answer to the question is yes. Yes, you are. All right. What you're supposed to maintain forever in a condominium are the plans and the permits of the building. Obviously, the governing documents, which you should have, and you can generally find those online. The association rules as they change from time to time, and copy of association minutes. So yeah, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that all my clients have minutes for the last 40 years. I don't think anybody's going to tell you that. But technically, that's what the law provides. You are supposed to maintain all that stuff forever. And Alex, you guys ever run into issues with some of these things that are supposed to be maintained forever, like they're not there?
Many times, and especially for older associations that have had transitions, you've been self-managed, you've had, changes to your point. We have communities that are 60 plus years old at this point. So I think now, and maybe we'll talk about this to not spoil the end, but sort of, best efforts to try and recover or gaps in their disclosure list of what they do not have. So it's disclosed. So yes, we encounter this regularly.
And keep in mind, especially if we're talking about plans and permits, and if you're an older building, 30, even, 20-year-old buildings probably don't have copies of their plans and permits, from when the building was built. I'm not going to say that it would be unusual for you not to have them, but a lot of that stuff you can get online now. So if you happen to get a records request for some of the stuff that you're supposed to have in regard to plans and permits, and you say, well, we don't have it. Don't just say we don't have it right off the top. Go online, do some research, see if you can get it. Because if you're supposed to have it and you don't have it, what's the division going to do? We'll talk about that later. But if you're supposed to have it and you can get it, get it. All right. If you get that request from that recalcitrant owner that says, I want to see the plans and I want to see the permits, you don't have them. If you can go online, get them, put them in the file. Now you don't have to worry about it. All right.
And Howard, that's very interesting. And just allow me to chime in. That's very interesting because when we start, like, again, a self-managed community or communities that may not have that, I mean, that's a perfect opportunity for the community itself to invest, with their plans, put them digital, right? That investment is very critical because, again, as we continue going, towards the future, everything is going to be more accessible. So we want to facilitate always that information. So that's a great point, and I know you're going to dive into that later.
Yep, that's a good point as well. So what besides what you got to keep forever, which is really not a lot, what else do you have to keep? Well, any election materials and bids you have to keep for 1 year. All right, bids, election materials you have to keep for 1 year. Almost everything else an association is required to keep for 7 years, a condo association. And then part of the new changes in the law, you have to keep for 15 years copies of the turnover inspection report and what's called SEERS, your structural integrity reserve study. What we will refer to as SEERS. I'm sure hopefully everybody online has heard of that term by now. If not, and you're involved in associations in any manner, you should have heard of that term. But for 15 years, you got to keep the turnover inspection report and SEERS. And moving on to co-ops, it's basically the same, but it does not say you have to keep the plans and permits and documents and rules forever. All right, those would fall under the 7-year rule. But in reality, you're going to keep that forever anyhow. I mean, I would never advise a client to get rid of the plans and permits or minutes just because they're older than 7 years. And 720 homeowner associations is basically the same as to what you have to keep for how long. But it's generally sort of like co-op. Everything is for 7 years. And then the election materials and bids are 1 year, and the turnover inspection report is 15 years. So that's sort of what you're required to maintain. Now, one thing I do want to get into a little bit, because this comes up a lot, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later when we get into electronics, but emails. Are emails official records, right? And the answer is generally, if it's an email that has between the manager and a board member or the manager and anybody else, yes, that's an official record. What does that mean? That means technically you're supposed to keep copies of these emails for, I would argue, 7 years. All right. Who keeps emails on their server for 7 years? Probably nobody in the real world. But I will tell you, if you get a records request and they want to see copies of all the emails from the manager to the community for the last 7 years, you're obligated to produce it. And if you can't produce it, you would be subject to actions by the division. So has that ever come up with you guys, Maureen, Alex?
Yes.
Very, very much so. I wanted to, before we leave this topic, I wanted to ask a very narrow question, Howard, that came out recently at a community where, as a part of their election process and their annual meeting, a request came in for sign-in sheets for people that had signed in. Is that required to be kept?
Is it a written record?
Again, the question is that it was the volunteer at the front has the sign-in sheet for people that want to speak in the meeting. They kept the sheet for the meeting and handed it to the board to go through questions, should you keep it?
I think it's a written record of the association. It has to be maintained as long as the minutes.
Thank you.
That's, you know, I mean, it's a written record, you know, that's pretty clear, in my opinion.
Thank you.
So, all right, now this is something that's new, and honestly, I think this has a pretty big impact on some associations. How are the records required to be maintained? All right, and what do we mean by that? And before I read what the new provisions state, you know, things have changed a lot in the, I don't want to say how long I've been in the industry, but in the last 10 to 15 years, things have changed a lot in a lot of aspects. And records inspections are one of them. You know, record inspections used to be unheard of 15 years ago. Maybe somebody wanted to see something. Maybe they wanted to see this. And now they've gotten a lot more prevalent. And unfortunately, the record keeping hasn't kept up with the records requests. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the things Maureen talked about, we'll get into a little bit more, is digital records. Okay, everybody now wants you to email them whatever they want, or they want to be able to find it on the website. Okay, and if you can't email them, and if it's not on the website, why not? All right, but the truth of the matter is, probably up until 5, 7, 8 years ago, all records were paper. That's it. That's how records were kept. They were paper. And when an owner made a request to go look at association records, it was very common for the association to say, they're in that storage room. Go have a look. You can look at whatever you want. And you would walk into the storage room and there would be maybe hundreds of banker boxes with handwritten notes, you know, 2016 financials, 2012 minutes. And half of the boxes would be, you know, without lids, and half of them would be strewn about. And you would walk into, you know, and what I hate to say is what you walk into when you walk into a lot of people's storage rooms that they keep. It's a mess. All right. And that's the way, unfortunately, things were done. And, you know, that's what you had to deal with. Well, because of that, I don't know if it was last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, the laws were changed. And now the law provides this. The official records must be maintained in an organized manner. All right. Well, there's a first problem. That facilitates inspection of the records by a unit owner. So let's talk about that sentence. In an organized manner that facilitates inspection. So having a room of boxes strewn about, I don't think facilitates inspection. All right. Having a room with 100 bankers boxes where they're all stacked and marked, I don't have a problem with that. Okay, they're organized and they facilitate inspection. But if you're one of those associations that has your records from 1990 to the year 2000 stored at ABC Storage, 8 miles from the association, which there's nothing wrong with that, but you walk into that storage room and the records are all over the place and the boxes aren't marked and nobody can find anything, that's not going to fly anymore. All right, so you're going to have to address that. The other thing the statute says is that in the event the official records are lost, destroyed, or otherwise unavailable, the obligation to maintain the official records includes a good faith obligation to obtain and recover those records as is reasonably possible. And that's what I was just speaking about earlier regarding going online for plans and permits. All right, and why is that in there? Owner makes a records request. The records were lost. There was a fire. There was a flood. There was a hurricane. Okay, whatever the case may be, the records were lost. You know, they want to see the minutes from, you know, 2016. Okay, or they want to see the minutes from 2020, 5 years ago. And whatever hurricane hit and the office was destroyed and we don't have any records from 2020. All right. If the owner made a complaint with the division about not being able to have those records, and the association's response was, well, due to Hurricane Milton, here's what happened, and here's the inspection report, and here's the police report, and here's how terrible we were affected, the division would probably say, you don't have them, you can't produce them, and, you know, so be it. But this now makes an obligation on the association to try to recreate those records. And I'm just using the minutes as an example. You know, maybe it had, you know, so how would you recreate minutes? Well, maybe you get a hold of the secretary. Hey, do you have any notes that you took from the 2020 meetings? Or maybe you know there was that one owner that recorded all the meetings and you call that owner, hey, do you by any chance have recordings of that meeting that we could use to make minutes? That's what this says to me. And I'm sure you guys have dealt with this a lot where records either don't exist or they were lost. And so how do you advise your clients in those respects?
It's a very case by case basis, and I think to your point, Howard, that if you can call a bank to get records, if you can ask the secretary who's got a copy on of a Word document that they produced or an Excel sheet, there is a lot of running around, and I think that is really the crux of this facilitates inspection and this now obligation to recover, that not only does the room have to be right and be labeled and the like, but you have to try and go get it. So I think for us, again, in speaking with our associations and partnering with them to try and think about the best way to do it, financial is one thing, but there's a lot of volunteer boards. These are volunteer boards. These are volunteers. They don't stick around. They sold. They moved. They're not there. So again, I think you're going to make your best reasonable effort to go out there and do that and document it.
Yeah. And another point is also that's important in these cases like this, we have to go back to a bank. Sometimes they don't want to give it to not even the new board member. So normally you would bring in your attorney to help facilitate, have a nice letter written by the attorney. Again, because we are trying to recover the documents. And of course, we're the new management agent, right? We have a new board. And that board member that lived there 6 years ago is not responding. So again, best practice is what we need to do to help bring that information back.
Yeah.
We normally partner with, again, with the attorney, and it really helps because sometimes the bank will say, no, absolutely not. I'm sorry, thank you, but no. It will be hard in some cases.
I wish other people listened to it. I wish my wife listened to an attorney the way other people sometimes listen to it. It doesn't work out that way. I don't know why. The other thing is, and Maureen touched on this briefly, we're in the digital age now. All right. If your association has not started converting all of your official records into digital records, you need to make a plan to do so. And what do I mean by make a plan? Does that mean I'm telling you that your manager should spend 4 hours a day scanning all of the unit owner files in an 800 unit condominium, into the computer so everything can be No, that's not what I'm talking about. There are companies that do that for you. There are services that do that for you. And depending on the size of your association, it may not be cheap, but you need to look into that. You need to get some costs and you need to start budgeting for that. All right. Because as we're going to talk about shortly, the laws again were changed to say you can make the records available on the internet now. Okay. Instead of having to produce them. And we'll talk about that. But if you're a board member or a manager and your associations have not thought about digital conversion of your official records and all the records in your files, you need to start having that conversation. Okay. It's something you need to talk about. And one other thing, and the reason I mention this is when you're doing that digital conversion, not all records get converted. Okay. And what do I mean by that? If you have records in a unit owner's file regarding an emotional support animal, or for some reason medical information, okay, you still need to keep that in the unit owner's file. But I don't know that I would digitize that and upload that. I wouldn't. I would keep that in a folder separate in the unit owner's file as information that's not disclosable as official records. So I know I'm getting a little far afield here, but I just didn't want everybody to think that automatically, poof, everything goes. There are still some things, if you look in the official records in the statutes, that are not disclosable. Social security numbers, driver's license numbers, that sort of stuff. So just make sure you take a measured approach when we start doing some of these things. Okay.
And I think, Howard, before you leave that topic, I think Maureen and I have spent a lot of time, I would say in the last 9 months, with associations we meet with, and mostly newer folks that are new to AKAM, about that investment in what investing in your future documentation is going to be. How will you maintain it? Where will you maintain it? Is it searchable? Is it fully available from the cloud? Is it in printable form? There's all sorts of questions to ask and think about. And to your point, this can be a very expensive project and undertaking for an association. This is not something to be left to guesswork. And I think the file structure for how you save, and everything that goes with it. It's a real project. So for any of you who are out there thinking, oh, this is such a big deal, it is, but we can overcome it. It's very real, but it's a project that we have been through several times. And again, every association is different, but that investment in your documents is really non-negotiable going forward.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to mention, and I know this does not apply to AKAM. I'm not speaking about AKAM, all right? But you want to be careful with some of these management companies that they'll start making these digital records for you, but when you change management companies, they don't want to transfer them to you, all right? And number one, that's illegal. It's against the statutes. But just be aware of that. And another reason, and again, I'm not saying this is self-serving, but another reason you want your attorney to look at your management contracts before you agree to them is because these are the kind of provisions we're going to make sure are in those. Okay. So if you're dealing with, other management companies, smaller management companies, just make sure you're covered in regard to turnover of electronic records from for your association as well. Again, I stray, but
no. But that's a great point, Howard. And we actually are working with associations now whose documents are tied up in proprietary software that they cannot get transferred, that they are now making a copy of, trying to put a history together in printed form so they can have it to go scan it back into something else. It's really, really inefficient, tremendously expensive. And to your point, it's that uncomfortable sort of feeling of, what do you mean I don't own my documents? So yes, so again, great point. We don't do that. And again, can help facilitate folks through those questions.
Yeah, because it belongs to the association. It's like it belongs to the association. We're gonna go ahead and set you up for success. But absolutely, these documents belong to you, to the community, and that's where it needs to stay. So it's having more that friendly approach. I think it's important, but also again, tag teaming with your attorney, with your board, with the community, just making sure everything is where it needs to be and be straight shooter there.
Yep. And I will affirm that AKAM doesn't do that. So.
No.
Let's talk about website requirements. So again, we're talking about getting into the digital age. A lot of things are online now, on the web, on the website. And condominiums have been required to have a website. If you have a condominium of 150 or more units, they've been required to have a website for years now. And there are certain things that have to be on that website by law. And by the way, that 150 unit condominium changes to a 25 unit condominium come January 1st, 2026. So even the smaller condominiums now that got away from this website requirement, 25 units or more as of January 1st, you have to have a community website. And again, caveat, when you get a community, your association website, you want to make sure that the website is owned and under the control of the association and not the management company. All right. Because the association controls that. You can coordinate through the management company. You can use a management company preferred vendor, whatever that case may be. There's nothing wrong with that. What you want to make sure is that if and when you change management companies, it doesn't affect the website. That's the thing, because it's an association website. What has to be on that website? Well, again, if you go to the statutes in 718 and 720, they're very specific. You have to have on the website your association documents, your rules, the budget, financial reports, insurance policies, director certification that the directors have been certified in accordance with the law, meeting minutes, membership meeting minutes, board meeting minutes, any contracts between a director and the association. So if for some reason the director does something and they contracted with the association, which is a whole different question, how you do that. If you have that, that has to be on the website, as well as any contracts where there may be a conflict of interest with the board member, which would be the same thing. The turnover report, and how long do you got to keep the turnover report for everybody out there in TV land? 15 years, remember? Okay, we just talked about that. And this is one that gets a lot of discussion and questions. You have to have a list of contracts that the association is party to on the website. Now, Alex and Maureen, do you get questions about that? And what, in your opinion, does having a list of contracts on the website mean? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but hey, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, we get this a lot. So the written list for a inspection request is the list of the documents that the association has in their control that they're going to give to you. It's also the list of things they don't have. So
I'm sorry, Alex. I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm not talking about the checklist. I'm talking about the list of contracts that the association is required to maintain on the website.
All.
Well, when you say what needs to be on the website? The contract or just a list of contracts?
The actual contract.
I disagree. I disagree.
Great. Bring it on.
Yeah. No, that's why we're having this discussion.
Bring it. We love it.
It both ways, yes.
Yeah. No, the statute says a list of contracts. So all the association has to have is a list. Management agreement. So, AKAM, pool service agreement, ABC pool, roof inspection, blah, blah, blah. All you have to have is a list of the contracts on the website. If an owner wants to see a contract, obviously they have a right to see the contract. But the association is not required to have physical copies of the contracts on the website. All right. And Alex, you're not the first one that replies like that. So don't feel bad, because a lot of associations think they do have to post the contracts, and they call us up. We got a 187-page construction renovation contract. Are you telling me we have to post that whole thing on the website? No, you don't. Just a list of the contracts.
And sometimes, Howard, and to time it, because the occasions that, again, I know where Alex head's coming from, because there's a lot of times it's, again, looking at projects, right? I want to see the contract. I want to see the detail. I want to see. So that's why in operations, normally, again, our transparent approach is always, it's your contract. It's you have it. But I've seen the cases that that is just listed. Just list.
No. And I do. There's nothing wrong with posting the contracts if the association wants to. Maybe you're a smaller association. You got 6 contracts. That's all that And the association says, "Hey, we don't care. We're going to post them on." There's nothing wrong with that. All right. I just get we get in. Not we. The association will get into fights sometimes with an owner. Well, you're supposed to have the whole contract posted on the website, and I'm going to file a complaint. Not the case, but there's nothing wrong with doing it.
That's great to know, Howard, because again, to Maureen's point, most of the time is people don't want the list. They want to look at costs. They want to look at terms. They're looking for that reason of why they wanted to see the contract. They already knew that XYZ pool company is at the community. They want to see what they're being paid or what the terms of the agreement are. So again, best practice in my personal experience has been put it up there and let people see it.
Correct.
Yeah, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. The when that gets a little cumbersome, again, you got that 600-unit condominium, and there's 17 contracts that they have for all these different services. So, but yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. And it's pretty much the same for homeowner associations. Now, in the past, until recently, homeowner associations were not even required to have a website. But as of January 1st of this year, homeowner associations of 100 or more units are required to have a website. And I am sure there are a number of homeowner associations that are 100 or more units that do not have a website yet. None of them managed by AKAM, I'm sure, but I know there are other ones out there. So again, if you're dealing with a homeowner association, either as a board member or as a manager, and you have 100 units or more, you are now also required to have a website, and you basically have to have on that website the same thing as the condominium association: documents, rules, list of contracts, budget, financial reports, insurance, director education, membership meetings, and meeting notices. The other thing is, for both websites, another requirement is that the information that's available only to unit owners has to be behind a password protected portion of the website, so that not just anybody can go on and get this confident, I don't want to say confidential, but personal information, financial statements, and that sort of thing. That has to be behind a password protection portion of the website. And so how are you guys doing with your homeowner associations getting set up on these websites?
Correct. I mean, the platforms that we use are very friendly. So we set up every association for success. So we'll set up a roster for owners. Other ones are resident tenants, or tenants, right? So we want to make sure when we're sending those emails or the accessibility, we go ahead and set it up from the beginning. And I think you bring a very valid information, Howard, because a lot of associations that have 100 units or think, they're very small, they don't budget, they don't invest to bring in and digitize, and
Yep.
have a website. They don't understand. So one of the challenges when we're going out there and having these conversations with Alex is, our main thing is to make sure the association stays in compliance, is in compliance, or bring them up to compliance, right? That's one of the main, number top priorities that we have. So absolutely, we'll set up that website, but we want to make sure that it's correctly done. But yes, we have the capability of doing that in each association on accessibilities and levels of access too.
And I think what's also good for that question, Howard, is that for smaller associations, especially HOAs that are sort of new to the game, there's a lot of software packages out there made by third parties that are statutory, compliant, statutorily compliant, and do what the association needs. But if you're an association that's not gated, doesn't have, tennis courts and pickleball, why go out and buy a software package that has all these other bells and whistles that you're not going to use? So I think one of the other things that we talk about a lot is what's the sort of minimum bar for compliance? What does that look like? And how will that third party program or platform be managed or utilized by your association going forward? So again, if you're not tech savvy, if that's not been your thing at your association for the last 30 years, the last thing you want is some, NASA command and control platform that's just not necessary.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. The other thing is, and again, every association is different. Every association likes to save money. All right. We all like to save money. And how do associations try to save money sometimes? Well, whatever needs to be done, they put it on the manager. Okay. Oh, we're having a concrete restoration project. We don't need somebody to oversee that. The manager will do that. Oh, we're having a $1.2 million roofing contract. The manager can oversee that. Okay. The answer to both of those comments is not really, but that's a discussion for another day. My point is, well, we need a website. The manager can do that. Okay. Depending on your association, maybe the manager can. All right. In my personal experience, most of the times the manager is doing much more important work than updating your website. All right. And the reason I say that is, once you establish this website, you have an obligation to keep it current. So just because you say, oh yeah, January 1st, we put up a website. Yep, we're in compliance with the law. Well, if you don't have your January meeting minutes or your February meeting minutes, if they've been up there already, or any new bids you've gotten in the last 2 weeks, if they're not up on the website, you're not in compliance. And while it's not going to matter most of the time, when it will matter is when somebody files that complaint that you're not in compliance, and they take screenshots that show it's November of 2025 and the last minutes on the website are February of 2025, and you've had a meeting every month. That's when it's going to become important. So it's not just setting up the website, it's maintaining it as well is also crucial. And that's why, a lot of times it makes more sense to have an outside vendor or a vendor recommended by a management company help you, instead of always putting everything on the manager. All right. And for those of you who don't know, I was a manager for 20 years before I became an attorney. All right. So I understand what the managers go through and what's put on them. And that's why I make some of these comments. So,
Absolutely.
all right, let's see where we are. Now comes a fun one. Electronic records. What are we talking about with electronic records? We're talking about emails, text messages, okay, all kinds of fun stuff. So, I touched on it briefly earlier. Are email messages part of the official records of an association? Well, there are arbitration cases, arbitrations through the Division of Condominiums, Mobile Homes, and Timeshare. It's the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, Division of Condominiums, Mobile Homes, and Timeshares, Compliance Division, arbitration section. That association, first of all, if your email has an association name in it, treasurer at ABC Condominium, president at ABC Condominium, that's an official association record. If the email has the manager email address in it, that's an official association record, no matter where the email came to or from, other than an attorney, which is obviously privileged. Okay. So that means official association emails are official records. You are required to keep copies of them or electronic copies of them. And if an owner wants to see all the emails from the manager to ABC Roofing about the roof project in 2023, they have a right to see those emails. Okay. And if for some reason you don't have them, obviously I think the onus might be on the owner to prove such emails exist. The association says we don't have any emails. We never emailed ABC Roofing. I don't know how the owner would say otherwise. All right. On the other hand, if the association says, they were deleted, or we changed computers, or there was an electronic pulse from the sun, or whatever the case may be, that could be a problem. So you are required to keep those emails. Now, I do want to tell you that there used to be, there was an older arbitration case that says emails from a personal board member's email address to another personal board member's email address. So Maureen at gmail.com to Howard at gmail.com are not official records. All right. But there is another more recent arbitration decision that says even those emails between private email addresses, if they are discussing association business, they are considered official records. All right. So word to the wise, word to the caution. If you're a board member or manager, any of your emails are subject to disclosure as an official record. Now, most board members are going to say, so what? I got nothing to hide. I could care less if they see my emails. We're talking about budget. We're talking about contracts. But we all know sometimes we talk about other things. We talk about Mrs. Smith and what a blankety blank she is. And we talk about that blankety blank, board member this. And so those emails are also subject to release. And when the association files some sort of an enforcement action against Mrs. Smith or whatever, her overweight dog, parking illegally, smoking in the lobby, and they make a records request, and there are emails from the president to the manager, make sure you get that blankety blank Mrs. Smith and keep an eye out for her. And I want you to send a maintenance man to keep an eye on her and check, those are going to come out. And so you got to be real careful with those emails. And I see Maureen itching to speak, but I just want to say one more thing. Forget about records requests. If the association is involved in a lawsuit, all of your emails are discoverable in a lawsuit. And, don't be surprised if you see that email from the president to the manager saying, yeah, that Mrs. Smith is a real piece of blankety blank, and I really want to get her up on a screen in front of a courtroom in a 4 foot by 6 foot screen in front of a judge. So you really, really, really have to be careful what you put in your emails. Go ahead, Maureen.
Absolutely. No, and again, I'm going like this because I'm going back when I used to be a general manager. I'm like, yes, and yes. I'm just going through the motions, and you bring so much great value, Howard. But one of the things that's important when you transition in or you're getting to meet the community, also, again, emails. email should be, the association should have their own emails. It shouldn't depend on the management company for the emails. And that's important because although it might be a, I don't know, GoDaddy or what you know, they should create their own emails because of history and having that information throughout, you know, management, you know, they might, my new board may change and they might say, Maureen, you know, we want you now and servicing the community, but emails, what are your thoughts on that? Especially Howard, you know, with transitions or whatnot. What are your thoughts on you know, on emails? Because going into the specifics.
I agree 100%. The best thing you can do is set up, you know, president at ABC Condominium, vice president at ABC Condominium, and then whoever that person is uses that email, and you have that continuity. Okay, you can even have president 2022 at president 2023 at. Okay, I discourage board members from using their personal email addresses for association business, because you're not going to be a board member all your life, you know, and you don't want to get an email 2 years from now from a disgruntled owner saying, hey, you know, what about this? What about that? I just think it makes more sense personally and from the association's point of view not to use personal email addresses when you're conducting association business. I agree with you 100%.
And Howard, how does text fall into that? Because it's just so easy as
well, that was
to text your manager.
That was a perfect segue, Alice, because that was the next thing I was gonna mention. So thank you for the setup. Yeah, no, you know, unfortunately, and I say that on purpose, unfortunately, text messages have gotten a lot more prevalent. All right, I get them from clients all the time. All right, and my response is, please send me an email. I do not conduct business by text. Okay, and a client asked me, well, why? What, you know, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is if there's a lawsuit and somebody says, you know, that person was texting the attorney, you know, I don't want my phone being subject to an inspection. All right, if it's something that wasn't attorney-client privilege. And the same would go to a board member or a manager. You know, if the board member is texting a manager about a water leak on a Saturday, okay, about what they're doing and what they didn't do, and then somebody files a lawsuit about repairs that weren't made or were made improperly, those text messages between the board member and the manager are subject to discovery. How are they going to get those? Somebody's going to examine your phone. Okay. You say, well, Howard, this is the emergency on a Saturday. How do we get around it? You pick up the phone and you talk. All right. You know, unfortunately, and I'm as guilty of it with anybody, with my friends and family, it's easier for some reason we like to text more than we do to pick up the phone and call, you know? And it's like you get a phone call, it's like, oh, why are you calling me? Just text me, you know? But from an association point of view, that's not something you want to do.
Is it the responsibility, if you are a board member and you are texting the somebody on the association staff or another board member via text, are you required or obligated to keep those texts, or if you dump your texts every month, is that okay?
I think from a technical point of view, if you're texting association business as a board member or a manager, you have an obligation to maintain that for 7 years.
Great point.
All right. So yeah, so that's, you know, so that take that to heart for those who are listening, you know, and again, it's real easy. We like to text, but my standard response is I do not conduct business by text message, you know, call me or email me, because that way, call me, there's no record. The only record is what's in my mind. Okay. Email me, I have a record, and that protects everybody. All right.
And often enough, you get pulled into like the WhatsApp groups or the text messaging group like you have, and even going further, right? Again, community, it's how the era that we're living, actually. It's like they put the manager sometimes in community chats. It's like, why?
Well, that's a whole separate issue. I'm actually involved in 2 lawsuits about that right now. So my only advice would be, you know, as a board member or a manager, generally you don't want to be involved in any chat groups that have to do with the association. And board members are going to say, well, that's how we get the pulse of the community and everything. And I understand that. But if you make any comment in that chat group, you're seen as a board member stating association policy, and that can be a problem. And anything further than that on that issue, talk to your association attorney. Okay.
Correct.
All right, we're moving along. We're running out of time. We're having such a good time.
Yes.
Let's talk about penalties for failure to maintain the records. So we talked about what you have to maintain, how you have to maintain it. It has to be accessible. It has to be organized. And again, I know this never happens in any AKAM communities, but what if it's not? What if you don't have the records? What if they're lost, you don't have them, you never kept them, and you're required to? Okay, what are the penalties? Again, I will tell you that 10 years ago, if somebody made a records request and you didn't have the records, the division would send you a warning letter and say, shame on you, don't do it again. All right, and that would be it. And if you did it the second time, they would say, we really mean it this time, don't do it again or we're going to fine you. And then if you did it the third time, they would fine you. Okay, well, those days are long over. I would say for the last 5 to 7 years, the division is using these complaints as a funding mechanism. And if there's any violation that is found to have occurred, you're getting a fine. Okay, not only are you getting a fine, board members are required to attend educational classes. All right. So these things about not maintaining records, not having official records, not being able to produce official records, not producing them on time. Okay. 10 days, you have 10 working days to produce, 10 working days to produce records. If you don't do any of this and somebody files a complaint with the division and the division finds that the association was in violation, you're going to get a fine. And the fines for the association can be up to $5,000. All right. So, don't do it. Maintain what you're supposed to maintain. Respond promptly. Anytime an association gets an official records request, in my personal opinion, you should go over that with your attorney. Number one, so the attorney can put it on his or her calendar to make sure a response is filed timely. Number two, to make sure you produce what you're supposed to produce in a timely manner. And if you don't, how you may be able to get around it. And the other very important thing is a lot of what associations consider official records requests are not proper official records requests. And if you get a records request that's not proper, you're not required to respond to it. And it doesn't matter what happens afterwards. Okay. And what do I mean by a proper records request?
Yeah.
Owners have a right to request to inspect and make copies of records at their expense. Okay, what does that mean? So how should that work? The owner sends a letter to the association, and there's questions whether it has to be certified or not. If you have it in your rules, it has to be certified. I think it has to be certified. If you don't have it in your rules, it doesn't have to be certified. Speaking of rules, if your association does not have rules and regulations governing document inspections, it should. Okay, talk to your association attorney about that. But an owner sends a letter that I want to inspect, the minutes from 2023. Here's my whole list of what I want to inspect. Unfortunately, they can send a letter that says, I want to inspect all the association official records. And unfortunately, the arbitration people have ruled that's a valid request, even though I think it's a BS request. Different story. But they send that request. You schedule, all the association has to do is give one date and time within 10 working days that the records will be available for inspection. Your records will be available for inspection at 10 a.m., February 17th, 2025. That's all you have to do. If that date and time is not convenient for the owner, fine. You work out a mutually convenient date and time afterwards, but the association has complied with the statutory requirement of responding when it has to. That's a valid records request. What's an invalid records request? And a record request can be sent by email too. All right. Again, unless your rules and regulations state otherwise. Here's an improper records request. Please send me copies of all minutes from 2024. That's not a proper records request because that owner is requesting the association to send them copies. The association is not required to send copies of anything to anybody. in regard to a records request upon request. So a lot of times associations will get that email or letter from an attorney. Please send me copies of all meeting minutes from 2022 to 2025. Sincerely, Mr. Big Shot Attorney. All right. And my response is, you don't have to respond to that letter at all, because you don't have to send anybody records. All right. That answer your question, Alex?
It does. And I think that the not respond at all is a very interesting piece.
Well, listen, I don't want to call, you know.
Speak to your attorney. But I think, Howard, what you're saying is dead on. And we see this a lot. And this is just a question of if you start trying to be too nice or too much, then you're starting to set precedent you might not want to set.
I mean, look, I'm not going to tell the other guy what he did wrong, you know. But at the same time, I may send a response that says, you know, this is in response to your letter. It's not a valid record request. Have a nice day. And let them figure it out. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. So I see we're butting up against the end of time here. So let's talk about the last thing we want to talk about. And that is, not only do they expand how long you have to keep records and what records you have to keep, the association, when an owner makes a records request, a valid one, the association is now required to produce a checklist when that person comes to inspect. And that checklist has to include what the owner requested, what was, has to include what was provided and what was not provided that was requested. All right. And that is required to be produced and given to the owner every time an owner makes a record record inspection. All right. Now, I do want to clarify this only applies to condos. So we're only talking about condominiums in regard to this checklist. And the checklist is very basic. Maureen, I think I sent you guys a sample of a real quick, simple checklist. This is all that a checklist, has to have. The name of the association, the date, who the owner is, what records were made available, what records were not made available. And while the statute doesn't say, I would put on there and why, requested copies of all texts between manager and JB Roofing. List that under not available, and then I would put in parentheses, none exist, something like that. So you have it as a record. And then the association should sign it and the owner should sign it. And if the owner doesn't want to sign it, fine. I would just put on there, owner refused to sign. All right. And the owner gets a copy, and obviously the association wants to maintain a copy. Check with your attorney. You can use a generic form. A lot of times when an owner makes a request for 27 different documents, some associations and some attorneys will make a checklist of those 27 documents and say provided, not provided, and why. There's different ways you can do it, but just be aware that you are now required to have a checklist. And if you don't, it's a violation. And if an owner files a complaint, what did we say is going to happen? It's not going to be a slap on the wrist anymore. You're probably going to get a fine, and you're probably going to have the board members go take some remedial training. So we got a couple minutes left. You guys got any questions on anything we've gone over?
I have one question that from one of the participants that asked emails and phone numbers. Part of records.
Okay, good question. So if an owner if an owner consents to receive electronic notification from an association with official records, in other words, how you can send association official records by electronically now. If an owner consents to receive association notices electronically, their email is now disclosable as an official record. If they don't consent, then their email is not disclosable as an official record, and their telephone number is not disclosable as an official record. But if you consent to receive a notices electronically, that's an official record. That is different than voting electronically. You can agree to vote electronically, okay? That does not mean your email gets released as part of an official record. But if you consent to receive official association notices electronically, then your email is now part of the official records and is released to another owner who requests it.
Perfect.
The other question I'm just throwing in, Maureen, real quick, are personnel records financial records and compensation, are they disclosable?
Okay. Personnel records are not disclosable. Financial records of association employees are not disclosable. As in, W-2s or pay stubs or that sort of thing. And what was the last one you asked about, Alex?
Compensation. I think it was all
Yeah.
about.
No, right. So when you say compensation is not disclosable, obviously we're talking about paychecks made to an employee, W-2s, pay stubs. But of course, you do have compensation information in the budget. So, if it says, head engineer, $100,000 in the budget, that's disclosable. You can't say, no, you can't have that information. But, the personal, no, not disclosable. And the last thing I want to say is, look, we've talked about a lot of things. You hear from an attorney, and again, I don't say this in a self-serving means, but it's better to check with your attorney than not. I can't tell you how many times I get, emails or conversations with the client. We want you to look over this contract. Okay, send it to me. They send it to me and it's signed. I'm like, well, no reason me looking it over now. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, I guess is what they say, right? So while I know you want to save money by not speaking with your attorney, don't be penny wise and pound foolish, penny wise, pound foolish. I will stop with the idioms. I want to say thank you to Maureen and Alex for having me here today. It's been a pleasure as always. For everybody who's listening, thank you for listening. Hopefully I don't hear too much snoring out there. So hopefully you were paying attention, and it's been a blast. I look forward to the next time.
Thank you, Howard. Alex,
Thank
anything
you.
else?
No, I think we're great. The recording will be available next week online. Please come to the site. Any questions? And if you need to reach out to myself or Maureen, feel free anytime. We're happy to answer questions and put you in touch with Howard if you need to. Thanks a great.
Thank
have a
you.
great
Thank you
day.
very
thanks.
much, everyone. Have a
Bye
great
now.
one. Bye. Thank you, Howard.